TCU football schedule is absolutely brutal next year with multiple gauntlets sprinkled throughout the season. But there is at least one bit of silver lining you can positively take away. Oh, yeah, it's Locked on Horned Frogs. Play my music.
You are Locked on Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? I'm Darrion Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, host of the Locked on Horned Frogs podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything TCU athletics, Monday through Friday. We close out today's episode with a blast from the past that has now been brought to the present. You know Gary Patterson as the TCU head football coach, but get ready to know him as the USC defensive coordinator. I have some silver linings. TCU fell to Ohio State in women's basketball. Yes, that is facts, but I actually believe this loss could be good for the Frogs. And we're going to try to find a silver lining at the end of segment one, but this has to kick off with the absolute series of gauntlets that TCU is going to have to go through. The Big 12 dropped everybody's schedule on Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday morning, rather. I would say TCU has a very difficult schedule because they have three separate gauntlets that they have to go through. And I don't mean 3 games here, 3 games there, 3 games over there. You got a quarterback gauntlet to go through. You got a top team gauntlet to go through. And you have an end of season schedule gauntlet to go through. That is 3 separate gauntlets that could be killer. If I told you had to face a bunch of quality quarterbacks or high upside potential quarterbacks, which they're both sprinkled in there, by the way. If I told you TCU had to go against that, you would say, ooh, that's tough. Nobody wants to go against a bunch of good quarterbacks in one year. Nobody wants to do it. If I told you they had to go against some of the best teams in the Big 12 from the previous season, you say, oof, that's tough. Nobody wants to do that. If I told you that TCU at the end of the year had a 4-game stretch that could be pivotal to how they end the season, you probably wouldn't want to do it, but you may say, it did work out for TCU in 2025. We could get a repeat performance. Maybe so. TCU has closed the end of 2024 and 2025 strong, so maybe there's actually belief that they can pull that off. We'll talk about that on a little bit deeper on another day, though. These gauntlets, when you lay them out, each one individually has the ability to make you say, ugh, when looking at a schedule. You got all 3. And yes, there's some overlap, right? Some of the good teams have strong quarterback play. Some of these strong quarterback teams are going to be at the end of the season. So it's not as if you have 3 games here, 3 games there, 3 games there, right? It's just in general, these are all 3 different monumental tests that would define a season. The one silver lining is the amount of home games you have against quality opponents. That is a positive in my opinion. But let's first go through these gauntlets and then we'll close out with the home games that you do get. Quarterback gauntlet. Noah Fifita out of Arizona. First team all conference. I love Noah Fifita. I've said this before. He's one of the quarterbacks that I think is extremely talented. I think that when I watch him, he's probably the quarterback in the Big 12 who excited me the most just off pure eye test. There's a little Chambliss in him, right? Trinidad Chambliss is someone I brought up for Jaden Craig. But when it comes to Fifita, it just feels like the ability to just make things happen. That's what it feels like I see with Fifita. So very talented quarterback. You got to face him. You go to Brennan Sorsby. You don't have to face Cincinnati, but if you've been paying attention to what's been going on, he's now at Texas Tech. He's now at Texas Tech, and that's how you close the season with Tech. Devon Dampier. You got to face him at Utah, but let's say anything happens to Dampier. Knock on wood, right? You don't want to wish injury or anything on someone. But let's say something happens to Devon Dampier. You know who they got backing up Dampier? Bird Ficklin. Utah has 2 quarterbacks. I remember the whole Texas Tech losing their QB last year was a big thing on the squad show. For Utah, you lose one guy and you get another player who I think has the ability to be an all-conference player. Like, this is, to me, one of the more fascinating quarterback rooms. But what I just laid out, take out Ficklin, Dampier, Sorsby, Fifita. That's 3rd team, all Big 12. That's 2nd team, all Big 12. And that's 1st team, all Big 12. Fifita being first, Sorsby being second, and Dampier being third. You have to face every single one of the all-conference quarterbacks from the previous season. Even the one who transferred from his school, he's staying in the conference, going to the team that made it to the college football playoffs from the conference. Okay, you would think that's where the gauntlet stops, but it's not. Because then you have guys who feel how you want to feel about them. I think DJ Lagway has the potential to be a really good player at Baylor. It's probably one of the things I'm most interested to see because you've seen flashes of Lagway's potential at Florida. You saw potential to be a really good quarterback, but what you did see a lot was disaster. So who is he going to be? Is he going to develop? I mean, Sawyer had a pretty good season there, so it's not as if I think that Baylor is kind of a sinking ship, but they have been able to get some offensive success. So maybe you're going to get another good quarterback season from Baylor, and this time it's Lagway who's leading the way. I don't know, but I'll tell you this. He's a high upside guy. He's a guy that if TCU would have got, I think criticism would have been fine. Skepticism would have been fine. But excitement also should have been partnered with. I'll love to see who he's with now that he's leaving Florida and he's getting a different ecosystem to be in. But it doesn't just stop it there. You look at Alonzo Barnett III, who's coming in from James Madison to go to Central Florida, right? Like this, I'm talking about the transfers right now. This is one of the hottest G5 commodities on the market at quarterback. Took James Madison to the playoffs, had a great season the year before that. You're talking about a player who succeeded on the G5 level, is coming up to the P4 to try to show that he can be a quarterback on this level as well. But we just saw him have success. You can't sit here and say he's not a high potential guy. Lagway, Barnett, high potential players. You want to see what the floor and ceiling ends up being for them and what the consistent thread will be. But in all, solid pieces to pick up. It doesn't stop there because you still got to see Bear Bachmeier. You still got to see the defending, reigning offensive rookie of the year, freshman of the year. Like you still have to see that when talking about this. Avery Johnson is a player who could bounce back. I'm going through the quarterback gauntlet and I haven't even got to the other parts of the gauntlets. Remember, I said it's 3 gauntlets before we get to the silver lining. And I'm stressing this first one, and I haven't got to repeating anybody yet. Next year, TCU has to play the first team All Big 12 quarterback, second team All Big 12 quarterback, third team All Big 12 quarterback, the reigning offensive freshman of the year, who also has LJ Martin on his side. They have to play DJ Lagway, who's coming in as a high potential player. I think it could be very volatile, but it's one to monitor. Avery Johnson, who people thought very highly of and is looking for a bounce back year. Alonzo Barnett III, who comes in from James Madison on the G5 level, extremely successful and just led his team to a college football playoff berth. The gauntlet of quarterbacks that TCU is going to have to go against. I'm not rooting for any shootouts. When playing that caliber of quarterback that often. It's going to be very interesting to me. Now, you talk about the teams that are just quality opponents. There's 6 teams that finished above TCU in the ranking. So I'm not going to go with anybody who finished 5-4 in conference play, only 6-3 and better. Those teams were Texas Tech, BYU, Utah, Houston, Arizona, and Arizona State. Right? So that's 6 teams that finished above TCU. And TCU has to play 4 of them. And I think there's a lot of reason to assume they'll still be pretty good programs, right? Texas Tech, I think, is going to be solid. They got another quarterback who's going to be a quality guy leading the team. They lost a lot on that defensive line, but QB makes me feel like they can at least be a solid squad, right? And the way they invested this year, I expect them to similarly have that level of investment. Boom. You look at BYU. I just told you they got Bear Bachmeier and they got LJ Martin. That's a 2-headed monster right there. And Bachmeier should only get better. As a rookie or a freshman, you are expecting him to improve. I think you'll get it. You're going to get a better version of Bachmeier, and that's a team that beat the brakes off of TCU last year. Arizona, Fifita. Now, there is a common thread that these guys are led by quarterbacks I mentioned, but Arizona led by Fifita. Utah really talented program. Despite losing their coach, they still kept a good level of continuity. So there's some changing pieces and whatnot. But at the same time, you look at this situation and you get somebody who was already in the building. So them being a good team last year, you feel like they should be able to roll some of that over. You don't play Houston. You don't play Arizona State. I could argue that of the teams who finished above Arizona State or above TCU, Arizona State might be the one I want to face. Though I love the coach, no quarterback. Lost their best weapon, elite weapon in Jordan Tyson, who may be a top 5 overall pick this year. You no longer have Levitt, right? Like, these are things to have. So I just did that. Quarterbacks, teams you're playing. It doesn't get easier, right? So at least some of this is overlapping. At least it's not 6 quarterbacks you're playing and 5 tough teams you're playing. Right? At least it's not that. But you get to that final stretch. Arizona, Kansas State, Utah, Texas Tech. In that order, the last 4 games of the season. This sets up very similar to how this year panned out, where you have a pivotal 4-game stretch. You could finish it half and half. You could finish it, maybe 3-1, 1-3. We'll see. We'll have to see. But I think on Monday, we're going to dive into why I think that can be yet another make or break stretch in, what TCU has done recently and finishing strong, string of things of that nature, But that 4-game stretch is not something that I envy. And it's extremely important because it's at the end of the year. We know how the end of your year defines how you'll be ranked, what type of bowl games you go to. All of those things play a part. So we'll do that on Monday. As for the silver lining, something to be happy about. A lot of the tough teams, at least you get to play at home. You don't have Texas Tech at home, but you get BYU at home. You get Utah at home. You get West Virginia at home. You get Kansas State at home. Those are 4 pretty solid games to play at home. Morgantown's not an easy place to play, despite the fact that TCU went in there and won this year. But underrated, Kansas State playing at home, that is a major deal. You may not look at Kansas State as one of those teams, but Kansas State has whooped up on TCU recently. And every time that they just absolutely kicked them, it was at a neutral site or at home for Kansas State. TCU hasn't won in Kansas State since 2017. We're going on a decade, and they probably won't play next year, right? So, they won't have won in Kansas State, in Manhattan, in a decade by the time they play again. That's crazy to me. Anyway, that's crazy. But you look at, they beat Kansas State in 2022 in Fort Worth, but then that's when the streak started. You go play in Arlington, neutral site. You get beat as the favorite going into the college football playoffs. At least you still make it, right? That's the natty year. The year after, you get a thumping 41-3. The year after that, or 2 years after that, because you don't play in 24, in 2025, you get thumped again. And that's the 2-touchdown Hoover game, where Hoover gave up 2 touchdowns to Kansas State. You look at it, at least you don't have to go play at a place that you just have had no success winning at. You get to play tough teams like Utah and you play Utah and you get to play BYU at home. These are meaningful games that you get to play at home. And I think that does give you a little bit of an advantage. Now, speaking of an advantage, one could argue Ohio State had the experience advantage over TCU. I think that gap probably closes, which is just one of 2 silver linings that comes from the loss to the Buckeyes. Let's get into that a little deeper as we continue with Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. It's funny, about an hour before I got on to record, I was talking to a friend about some crazy hypothetical, and he asked if I had a tax guy. I said, yeah, his name's Turbo. Okay, I didn't say that, but I did say I use TurboTax. I don't have a tax guy, right? He's like, you have a tax guy? I said, no, I don't have a tax guy. I use TurboTax. And he should too. You should too. Hopefully you're a little bit more open to listening than he was. But tax season doesn't have to take over your life, and TurboTax is here to make sure that it doesn't. So instead of spending hours and hours and hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet up with a local TurboTax expert, either in person or you can do it online from the comfort of your couch. The same place that you're watching and listening to me right now could be the place that you're watching and listening to what a TurboTax expert has to say. They handled everything. Everything, W-2s, self-employment forms, all the things you can think of, they had me covered. And for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150. All in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by 28th of February. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. As we continue rolling with today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day and making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the country. Thank you for that. Now, now join the Everydayer Club as well, where we can come in and we can chat. I want to have as much interaction with the show as possible. And I don't just mean comments on YouTube, which would be great start. But go to the Everydayer Club and I can make you a part of the show every single week. That's what I think the greatest benefit is you transform from being a viewer or a listener to being a co-host, essentially. Now, don't be asking for my cut. Don't be asking for my cut. And let's drop that $5 a month. Now, as we continue rolling, I think that TCU women's basketball losing to Ohio State can actually work in their favor. It can actually be advantageous. What I'm not going to spin to you is some everybody needs to lose BS. I'm not spinning that narrative. I'm not doing that. What I will say, though, is this specific team could benefit from this specific loss. See, TCU already lost the game. The idea of going perfect was already gone. The idea of going perfect in Big 12 play was already gone. And it's not like this would have affected it anyway. This has absolutely no bearing on your standing in the Big 12 tournament or anything of that nature. And it's not like teams haven't gone undefeated. We've seen it just a couple of years ago with the Gamecocks, right? So, it's not as if this is a requirement. People act like, oh, you need to lose. You need to know how I feel. What I think TCU needed was a wake-up call that the bad habits that they've been getting away with, they can't get away with any longer, right? I'm young, right? I'm not quite into my 30s yet. And even when I get into my 30s, shout out to my 30-year-olds. That's not old either. But what I'm saying is I'm in my 20s. And in my 20s, I'm well aware that there are things that I can get away with physically right now that are bad habits that I won't be able to get away with for much longer. That's what I'm saying. Hey, I remember doing things at 22 that I can't do anymore. The idea of and I'm about to sound so old, but I need more sleep. When I was younger, when I was in college, I could operate on no sleep and I'd be just fine. It takes me a little bit to be fine now. And what I'm saying is not trying to give you my life habits or anything like that. But what I'm coming here to tell you is, yes, you can escape with bad habits for a little bit, but eventually those bad habits are going to catch up with you. I'm using my own physical ability or sleep schedule or whatever to drive that point home. But the truth of the matter is, let's take all of the comparisons and analogies away. TCU has a problem with ball security. TCU has an issue not turning the ball over, whether that's via steals, offensive fouls, traveling, whatever, errant throws, just throwing them away. Whatever the course of action is or whatever the action is, we have to try to see a way to rectify the course. That's what I'm saying. Because you look at the recent games, you look at how much they've turned over the ball, they've won until you play a team like Ohio State. You can't do it against the Buckeyes. You just can't. TCU had 16 turnovers versus Oklahoma State. They won by 8. Probably should have won by double digits, but I think a late Oklahoma State shot changed that. They had 17 turnovers versus Arizona State. Won by 31 points. Had 24 turnovers by West Virginia or against West Virginia. You won by 1 on a last-second shot that felt kind of miraculous. You have 17 against Arizona, and you win by 16. You have 20 versus Ohio State, and you lose by 2. Things are going to catch up with you. There's no question this is a March Madness team. There's no question that this is a top dog in the Big 12. I think they're the top dog in the Big 12, but let's just say A right now because there's other people who are coming for that throne, coming for that spot. That doesn't change the fact that they need to fix this issue. I've said it before. I said coming in, hey, They need to watch out for turnovers against Ohio State. They didn't do it. I came back, said, hey, didn't watch out for turnovers. It's probably a big reason you lost. You can get away with that sometimes against teams in the Big 12. Not all of them, but some of them. You almost didn't get away with it against West Virginia. You know why? Because that's another March Madness-esque team. That's another team that's fighting and pushing to try to get into the top 25. This is a quality opponent that you're playing. So no, having 24 turnovers against West Virginia is not going to allow you to win by 15. It's not going to allow you to win by 10. When you're playing teams like that, you sneak by when you make mistakes that way. But I believe that, it's not as if Campbell is a dumb coach. It's not as if the players are dumb players. I'm pretty sure they know they need to protect the ball more. But I would also say it's human to say I've been turning the ball over, but we've been winning, and allow winning to cover up for a lot of things. I think that's regular. I don't even see a flaw in that from a mentality standpoint, as long as you're able to get over that. You can't stay in that spot. You can't stay in the idea of I've been doing wrong, so now I can do this. That's not how it works, right? Or I can continue to do this. That's not how that works. You have to fix it. And I think losing to Ohio State put it in perspective that, once we start getting to teams that are March Madness quality opponents, we can't get away with the same things that we got away with once before. We can't get away with sleeping at 3:00 and waking up for an 8:00 class at 7, right? Like, we can't get away with those things. We need to stretch before leg day. I'm just throwing things out there that some people may have felt, and I know there's somebody watching that feels me on that. But you can't get away with it. In this business, I'm not talking about sports, I'm talking about sports media. In this business, it's always recommended to start at a smaller market. They say you want to take your lumps, right? You can make your mistakes. And the idea is the bigger the stage, the less grace you'll be given. I view that way for basketball as well. You can go play a team like Arizona State, have 17 turnovers and win by 31. That's fine. That's small stage, right? Like that's being in Bay City. That's being in Bay City. That's the first one I could think of, because I can't think of any small towns in the Metroplex that, like, I can't think of a small city in the Metroplex that has it off the top of my head. But you can be over there in Bay City, Beaumont, whatever. But by the time you get to Houston, by the time you get to Dallas, by the time you get to Channel 4, right? Channel 8, shout out Tegna. By the time you get to that, you got to be on your P's and Q's. Doesn't mean you won't make mistakes, but they can't be huge blunders anymore, right? They can't be 20 turnover games when you get to March Madness. I would even say that what they did against Ohio State is a little acceptable, because at least it's not March Madness. At least it's not do or die. You make that mistake in March, you're dead. Like, you make that mistake in March, it's over for you. That's just the way that I view it. So at least you had this type of game in the regular season. You had a Marta Suarez 2.9 turnover game. Like, those are two critical mistakes. You cannot have that type of performance against Ohio State from your second best player. Jelani Cambridge had a struggle throughout the day. Yeah, 1,000%. But she turned it on in the fourth quarter. You can have struggles, but you got to turn it on. This is your second best player, and she wasn't good enough against a team that is good enough to beat you when they are on. Can't have it happen. 20 turnovers, can't have it happen. But at least these things happen, specifically the turnovers. You got to get poised. I think that should be a real emphasis. At least that happened while you're still early, while you're still in January, not in March. That, to me, is the benefit and why it can work to their advantage. Maybe you can no longer put makeup over the blemish, put makeup over the pimple no longer. Let's clean it off, and let's actually scrub our face. Let's actually wash our face and try to do all the things to get the pimple to go away, not just cover it up. Now, let's move forward. Gary Patterson. I told you he'd be back. And it seems like it's no longer a maybe, and it's just a definite waiting to be confirmed. As we continue with Locked on Horned Frogs, we'll look at the return and the rejuvenation of the old ball coach. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked on Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. Now, Gary Patterson is nearing a deal with USC. I don't think there's a lot to say about it, but I do think this is a worthy angle to approach from a different point of view. I talked about this yesterday, that there's a difference between being a leading candidate and being the leading candidate. The LA Times article I read, which was days ago, said that Patterson was a leading candidate. To me, that meant that he was amongst a bunch. The leading candidate would have meant he was the front runner. You look at what Pete Thamel has said. He just said, hey, they're nearing a deal. They're targeting him. They are targeting, USC is targeting Gary Patterson as their defensive coordinator. And on top of that, a deal is expected to come together in the near future. It's just about figures. And what I'm interested in is not just the return of Gary Patterson. That's great. But what about the rebirth of Gary Patterson? Because when you're gone for 4 years, you lose a lot. You miss a lot. Are you prepared to deal with more modern offenses? He's not a head coach, so he's not going to have to deal with things like NIL as much. He can identify talent and have someone else deal with that. He'll go and he'll recruit. But like the things he's used to doing, that's probably the biggest change in college football. And I would assume as a defensive coordinator, you're less hands-on with the NIL of it all. Cool. Now, I'm looking at the rebirth and a rejuvenation, because who are you going to be in this new day and age? Are you prepared to deal with modern offenses? Are you going to change your scheme up? Are we going to see the same thing that you were doing from the 2021 season? Let's just say that. I don't want to go too far back, because his schedule, I mean, his system and philosophy definitely changed throughout the years. But the idea is solid. The idea is solid. I don't know who he'll be. And on Locked On Trojans or Locked On USC, that was a question that was asked. Like, is this too much of a blast from the past? And that's something that we'll have to watch. It'll be one of the more interesting things to see, because you came back from a 4-year hiatus after a 20-year career. No one thought you'd come back. No one did. And I think this is the last stage of his career. This is one last hurrah. He'll probably be there as long as Lincoln Riley's there, or until he decides he just wants to retire. But this is a man who is long been regarded as a legend. And now he's returning to his roots as a defensive coordinator with no other responsibilities, with 4 years off to study the game. He worked with Baylor for a little bit. He worked with Texas for a little bit. He did those things. And you feel like his ear has been enough to the streets, right? Like it was just a year, 2 years ago that he was working with Baylor. So he has been close enough to the game to sense the changes. But that's the rejuvenation. That's the question mark. The excitement, the exclamation point comes from the fact that he's returning to coaching. You love to see that. He's a legend. The question mark comes in, can you teach an old dog new tricks, and do you need to? Tomorrow, we'll get into the way too early rankings, and I think TCU is way too high. No, it's not way too high, but it is way too early. But it's never too early when you love football. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.